What makes you happy?
Be yourself, be positive. Just another mindset.
Hello, friends, and welcome to a new episode of the Just Another Mindset podcast, the show that inspires you to change and live a more exciting life. My name is Ishmael, and each week I bring to you a relevant conversation, message, or topic that will not only entertain you, but help you to change towards a more meaningful and satisfying life, individually and collectively. Let us get inspired and embrace collective changes for the better. In today's episode, I have the wonderful opportunity to talk to Dr. Joshua Bourne, who is a psychotherapist and a life coach. In this episode, we discuss why mental well-being is so important, and we distinguish between psychotherapy, life coaching, and psychometric testing. Joshua talks about ways on how to figure out what you like and what you want in your workplace. And we discuss the concepts behind working to live and living to work. Joshua talks about trauma and how people can unmask it in order to relieve a high pressure that lays on so many so-called high achievers. The path of healing starts with acknowledging that there is an issue, and we discuss time for reflection and the impact of cryptocurrencies on mental health. We also discuss key components of job satisfaction and how meaning and purpose of a job tie everything together. We evaluate the power of documenting change, and finally, you will learn how to make more aware decisions and grow your intuition. And with that, Joshua, a warm welcome to the Just Another Mindset podcast. And my first question to you is, how do you feel today and what is on your mind?
Well, thanks, Ismail. I'm glad to be here, on the podcast. And we had a slight conversation, before I came on about a lot of topics. And so I'm really excited to expand on that today. I'm feeling very happy and, rather than what's on my mind, I'm sure we'll get onto that in just a second. But I think the idea of, mental health and where we are in our world today in terms of, a lot of events going on in terms of whatever world you come from, it's extremely important to not overlook, our mental health. So when I saw your podcast and saw what you do, it's really exciting and encouraging. So all I could say is I'm glad to be a part of it, and speak with you for this time on it.
Wonderful. And I'm super happy to have you on board, Joshua. I'm really glad. And maybe for the people who don't know you so far, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe how does a typical day, if there's something like that, of Joshua looks like?
Sure. Well, thanks. Yeah. So everyone, I'm Dr. Joshua Bourne. I'm a psychologist and a life coach, actually. So I am London based and I have my own practice called Bourne Path. Maybe to help our audience, I'll just explain a little bit about myself and my background and why I even started, this practice in general, because I did my training in the UK, but you could probably hear my accent. I'm originally from California. So the idea of connecting actually with you, Ismail, in this podcast is great because I'm sure we have our listeners from all over, many different countries and places. And as much as I love California, I liked London living and felt really connected to the city and got my doctorate here. But when I worked for the National Health Service, it was wonderful. It was a good part of my training and experience. But what I ended up finding out was sometimes patients wanted more. They wanted more than just my typical day of, can I see you during the day? Can we engage in talking therapy? They wanted help with finding jobs. They wanted help with kind of sorting out life-based issues. And what I said to myself was, okay, I really like being a psychologist, but I want to do more. So I ended up getting life coaching training as well. And now I opened up Bourne Path because I want to help people, not just with mental health, but if we have concerns over where our careers are heading, as far as like job direction, in terms of maybe family issues, different things that come up that we can't always cover in therapy, I want to do that. So my typical day is seeing patients for a variety of those issues, not just anxiety and depression, which is typical, but career direction, career confusion. I work a lot with people in consulting and finance. I know we talked about that, so we may have some listeners, particularly in those fields, perhaps. But if you're in other fields, it's great to get you on board as well. So my typical day is seeing patients, but I'm also involved in research as well. I can expand on that another time, but research around developing mood questionnaires. I'm working with autonomous technologies because that's the future in the psychology and psychology fields. You know, the idea of when I can't be there all the time, either in hospitals or in clinics, the trend is moving towards a direction, Ismail, of can we send automated technologies like robots, you know, into hospitals? And that sounds kind of scary to think about, but it's going to be a big help to psychologists. So my day is doing research around that, developing these technologies, but of course, working with patients first and foremost.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And that helped me. And that obviously, I guess, will also help our audience to understand better where we are, where you are coming from. And it sounds certainly like a very interesting topic. I would like to cue for now, but those automated technologies and how to help people without being there by yourself. And Joshua, when I did some research on the person of yours, I found yourself to be at the intersection, as you just described, of psychotherapy, life coaching, and psychometric testing. Could you help me and could you help the audience to understand those three terms and also how you would define those three?
Absolutely. Well, it's something that I value very much at Bourne Path. So let's just say, Ismail, I'll give you an example. So I may get a typical call from a client, a prospective client that says, I'm really struggling in my place of work. I'm not really sure what's happening here. Can I ask for your help? So what I do is I assess that client. So what we do in the first assessment session is figure out which type of help we want more. It might be psychotherapy, which I won't explain too much because I think our audience might understand what that is. So a lot of talking therapy, and I'll use some buzzwords here. Like there's different types of therapies, like cognitive behavioral therapy, where we do a lot of exercises, like mental exercises, or psychodynamic psychotherapy. Let's say we really dig into your past. But that typical client might say, "Oh, talking therapy is great, but actually, what I'm looking for is a little bit more help on finding a new career, and I'm just not sure where that is." A psychologist might say, "Oh, that's great, but that's not really the nitty-gritty of what psychology and mental health is about." So that's why I'm also a life coach. So the coaching is there as well, to really help someone if they're struggling with where to go in their career, if they're not sure what's happening in their home life, if they're having trouble separating their home life versus their work life. You can uncover that in psychotherapy, but life coaching really gets to the nuances of that. But then a client might also say, Ismail, that, "Oh, you know, coaching is great, but I just have trouble working with certain maybe individuals at work. I need to build a team here at work, and I'm just not sure what the right personality types of personalities might be." So then I tell them, well, let's do some psychometric testing. So there's a specific test that's called the DISC personality test. I won't go into the nitty gritty details now, but what that essentially does, it's all on my website anyway at bournepath.com. So what you will find, or what I'll work on with the client, is a test that assesses their personality, assesses their work strengths and maybe areas of improvement, and matches them up. It gives them profile based on questions that they answer themselves and a report that I write in an interview that I have with the client to say, you know what, this test is saying, oh, you might be a very strong personality. You might have a dominant personality where you really want to lead, or you might have kind of a bit more conscientious personality. That's actually the C in DISC, and DISC is the name of the test, and it's an acronym. So the C is conscientious, where you might actually be the type of worker where you take a step back, and instead of dominating, let's say, the team, you might want to actually just take things in. So we might want to match you up with those types of workers. That's who you might work with. Or it might be that you want to go the opposite route and work with the dominant type if you're conscientious. So testing is really, it's not therapy. It's about assessing where you are in the workplace and who you might want to work with. Life coaching is a little bit more of, I want to change my career or home life. How can I do that? But then I also do learning disability testing as well, because I've had some clients tell me, I'm struggling with concepts, adults even, not just children, but adults who say, I'm having trouble. I've always had trouble in school. Is there something more going on? So I give what's called learning disability cognitive testing to assess whether there's a bit more of an explanation to difficulties people may have.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that clarification and giving another in-depth level here. And while you were talking, another question came to my mind, and you talked a lot about challenges that people have and potential suffering that people go through. So I don't know if you have a typical client, probably not, because you do many different facets of good stuff. But is it rather people who are suffering or seeing challenges, or is it people who want to thrive? Or is there also the big distinction between psychology? Is there the distinction between life coaching? Maybe you have a few words on that.
There is, and those are great questions. To not to tease our audience too much, but to answer your question, it's a bit of both. You know, what happens is someone who has a career difficult decision to make, you know, as I'm not feeling as motivated to succeed in my career. Let's say it could be a management consulting job where they worked very hard to get where they are, but the job and the company isn't as fulfilling. They feel like they're not getting as much support. So to answer your question, that's a challenge in of itself. But oftentimes, you know, this client might come to me and say, well, I've gotten where I want to be. It's a challenge because I may not be able to manage my work-life balance per se. And also, but how do I thrive? I'm not thriving. I'm going to work. I'm living to work rather than, you know, or rather, excuse me, I'm working to live rather than living to work. So we want to kind of switch that around to make sure we're thriving and not just realizing there's a challenge. But when there is a challenge and we feel stuck in our work life, that is perhaps one of the best eye-opening thing you could do is come to someone like me, just because admitting that there is a challenge, that we are suffering a little bit and we feel stuck in our pattern of work, or we don't really like where we're going, let's say, kind of in our work direction as an example. Just admitting that there's a challenge there will help you thrive. So what we do is we'd identify those challenges and one by one and take as much time as we need. There's no specific angle. But your other question of the differentiation between life coaching and psychology, the difference really would be if there's deep trauma, you know, let's say we're having a work issue or a career issue. But what we're saying is this is part of a long-standing pattern of behavior where when I was perhaps very young, there was some element of, let's say, even abuse that this person would have witnessed or suffered. And when we really dig that deep, that's where psychotherapy can really help and come in. But if we want to explore those issues in life coaching, we wouldn't really do that. Life coaching is not necessarily about exploring trauma, let's say. It's about how we can take what we're struggling with this second and really improve upon that, you know, kind of going forward. It's not that life coaching doesn't look back. Absolutely it does. But it doesn't address specific types of psychological concerns around deep depression, trauma-related issues, and the like.
No, and I suppose one can be lucky if he or she has a trauma to deal with, really, to meet someone like you or you, in fact, because one should be trained to deal with traumas, right? I mean, life coaching and coaching is a whole discipline of itself, but psychology and dealing with trauma is yet another one. So I would say, okay, lucky for the people who meet someone like you and not just, parenthesis, a life coach, but a real psychologist, if you want to say.
Yes,
yeah?
no, it's a really good point because the worlds of psychology and life coaching often collide. And one issue can be if you're a life coach and you don't have a lot of experience working with trauma and really knowing different types of psychological therapies, and the work goes there. What happens is the coaches, they often stop and say, let me refer you elsewhere. That was the issue I was seeing actually within the NHS, rather the opposite sometimes, where the NHS is wonderful and there's so many good services. But as a psychologist, when I worked there, so this is an opposite example of what I was mentioning, but when people would come to me for psychological issues and say, well, I think I'm okay, but I need help finding work. What would happen? My team would have to say, well, unfortunately, I can't help you do that as a psychologist. You need to contact, your social worker. And here I am thinking, I don't want people to have to wait to go out the door. I want, whether you're a life coach or whether you're a psychologist, I want clients to feel like they can come to you to explore issues from multiple angles. You may not want to be doing both at the same time, life coaching and psychology. I tend not to, just because it can get really confusing. So even though they do overlap quite a bit. So that's why, for example, that I mentioned earlier, I have a first session where we work out kind of what angle do we want to go. We can switch, certainly, but you're absolutely right. Good questions and good point there.
Interesting. And so you basically say in the first conversation, in the first meeting, you would understand which angle to look at together with the person. Is it rather one of psychotherapy, or is it rather one of life coaching? And the one could evolve into another if during life coaching sessions you experience that there is a bigger trauma, you would probably switch gears in a way, and likewise the other way around, right? So if you say, okay, well, we've dealt with different topics from the past, now let's shift gears and look into the future. So what is it that we actually have clarified, and how do we move forward? Okay, that's very interesting. I know that we will not go into specific cases, and I really would like not to, but if we talk about trauma, and we've mentioned a few industries, and it's also my background, if I want to say, I had to grin a little bit because when you just quoted it, that was the very first sentence I got from my very first partner. It's like, either you live to work or you work to live, choose why you're here. Full stop. And I'm not going to comment too much on that. But if we talk about management consulting, if we talk about investment banking or finance as industries, is there, I don't know, a share that you can talk about? How many people actually have, in fact, trauma, or how many people have topics to deal with before they can actually move on and just change their career or think about something more meaningful? I don't know if you have a few insights for us.
Sure. Yeah. Often, Ismail, I see a lot of these types of clients, and not to group them all in the same boat here, but you bring up a really good point when it comes to trauma. Whenever I work a lot with these clients, a lot of the clients are so invested in the work they do, and rightfully so. There's a lot to do, a lot of responsibilities to have, a lot of good work that's being done. But when it comes to exploring trauma, it's often repressed because of the busyness of their lifestyle, because of expectations that we all might have of, I'm on the track I want to be on. I feel stuck in certain ways. Where is my stuckness coming from? Is this something I've felt before? Is this something that I've been trying to hide and just move through when I am working in this incredible company, or dealing with, high profile clients that I'm managing, the management consultants and investment bankers in particular, dealing with a lot of high net worth individuals. You get a good high just from that yourself. So, but it comes with a lot of stress. And sometimes it's not just about changing work, but exactly as you said, if there is trauma there, have we masked it in some way? Are we trying to rush and move past it in some way? So oftentimes, I will see them for psychotherapy, because, it's all about identifying what we may unconsciously try to hide a little bit, and not saying we do it on purpose, but absolutely. And it could be trauma on any number of things. It could be things that we've witnessed, as children, horrifying experiences that we want to move past. It could be, due to relentless pressure that we've been made to feel from families, perhaps, that we're trying to get through. So it could be any type of trauma, really. So, but that often, yeah, when it gets unmasked, there's a level of almost relief that I hear from the client that makes me happy in a way. I get happy when the people I work with get happy. And of course, at the beginning of the work, when I do work with these clients, no one's too happy yet. And it can be a really uncomfortable experience to share that your deepest fears or all of these emotions, especially with the people we're talking about, the consultants and bankers, but from any other field as well. So absolutely.
So this admitting point of, let's call them high achievers, is one that can be fairly painful, but you basically said that there is also usually or oftentimes a big relief. I don't know if you can talk how that formulates itself, such a relief.
About the relief, yeah. Well, that gets experienced at many different types or many different points in therapy. It could be there's an expectation sometimes that when a banker or a consultant comes to me, and sometimes they may not even want to be there. Sometimes it may be that, and this happens to all of us. So if you're in the audience, I wouldn't be too surprised if you're listening now if this happens to you. But it may be that someone encourages us to go to therapy or coaching or the like, and we may not even believe in it. So what's often found is there's initial relief when we know that for an hour a week, someone is dedicated just to hearing what I'm suffering from, what my emotions are, what my feelings are. Just, when a neutral person like me comes into your life for an hour each week. So there's the initial relief that I'm being heard and listened to. But the repressed trauma that we were just mentioning before, especially when we didn't know it was there, Ismail, and anyone in the audience that's hearing this now, tell me if you've identified with this. If we didn't know, let's say there's a memory that we didn't ever want to relive, sometimes in psychotherapy, even in coaching, or even when we're doing some of the testing, this can come up, where there's a memory we wanted to move past that we're just not able to, even though we're working hard to try to block it from our minds. Relief can come when we actually acknowledge that there's a memory that we're working so hard in our banks, in our companies, to just move past. We're trying to prove ourselves to our family, to friends, whoever it might be. And it all might stem from a memory, perhaps. And there's relief when that memory gets acknowledged and shared. And when we tackle it and we say, no, there is another way forward. There is a way to get past this. So there's relief, but that comes a little bit later. So it can come at the beginning, it can come at the end, it can come in the middle. It may even come after therapy or coaching, because this is work. It's work for any of you listening. It's work for you to talk to someone for an hour a week, even though the dedication is just to you. It is work. So you may find all the benefits when it's over, when you're actually not seeing your psychologist or a coach. So comes at many times.
Absolutely, and I already want to use the chance here to admire you for all the great work that you do helping people from different facets of life. And if you talk about the different requests, I just gonna call, some of them may come from an internal drive, others might come from an external situation. But over the past few years, let's say 2-3 years, in my bubble or in the management consulting companies that I work with colleagues, but also with people in further spheres, I experienced that more and more time was there for reflection. Do you experience a certain spike of such requests, or do you also feel a different quality of those requests in your field? Has there something changed over the past 2-3 years?
Oh, sure. I think for all of us in the world that we're in a hopefully post-pandemic world, and now with difficult economic times, with changing from working in the office to now allowing you to work from home, there are a lot of benefits to that, but also there can be a lot of headaches. There's what the requests I've been getting and people I've been talking to have been saying, you know what? I'm actually spending a little too much time at home. I need a little bit of a break actually from home. As great as it was at the beginning, as great as it was to spend time with family, there's actually an increased need, it seems, for having separation time. And also, your point about reflection is a really good one, because yes, we have been working at home more in the last couple of years. It's given us, think about what's happened. We've had less time to commute. Where what happens when we commute, we're often running in between trains, traffic, whatever it might be. We're not really reflecting as much, although some people might on the train. I don't, if you're like me, you just kind of go right to the train and then to work. But I ever to each their own, right? So but no, so we've had a lot more time at home to kind of, where we're not thinking about like our commute, for example, or we're not having to move around between offices and buildings. Although there are some people, even throughout the pandemic, that I work with who have been at times, but still, people are finding a lot more time to reflect and a lot more time to question where they want to go in life. In fact, now is a wonderful opportunity because the idea of flexible working is now more accepted than ever. I mean, I told you this another time, Ismail, but I wrote my doctoral thesis on video conferencing counseling. Even for us psychologists, before 2 years ago, before the pandemic, it was starting to go the way of video conferencing counseling, but it was still quite heavily seen. Psychotherapy and coaching is a little bit more remote, but psychotherapy has been seen largely as we need to be in an office, but now it's a lot more accepted. So it's even caused me to do a lot of reflecting of where can I work with people and how. So absolutely. And I think partly because we've had more time, but partly because we've had more freedom of choice. We've had to make less decisions of what to do in the morning. If you think about it, Ismail, what are we doing? When you go to work, you have a routine. You wake up in the morning, you go get breakfast, you get on that train or a car. Your day is kind of set. But now that we don't have to make as much of those decisions, you now have you're all of a sudden making more choices for yourself on what you want to do with your extra time. So with that comes a bit more, you could say, anxiety to some extent. It comes a bit more reflection in terms of, am I working the right career job? Can I do something else from home? So absolutely, reflection is everywhere these days.
Yeah, it would be super interesting for me to hear if there's common patterns or themes, if you want to say, that people actually think more about due to the fact that we have more time. So I don't know if you can give us a few more examples or take us down a few thought experiments that you have experienced with people you work
Sure.
together with.
Sure. I think it stems from the idea that, before the last few years, we were all kind of used to a routine that I was mentioning earlier. This idea of, I'm going to have a job and I'm going to wake up in the morning, go to that job and then come home at night. I mean, it's not always like that. Some people have had different lives that I've worked with, but now, as far as, without generalizing too much, because people are taking more control of their lives than ever before, and they're making more decisions for themselves. Just an example is, people are now becoming, and I'm not just talking about management consultants and bankers, of course, but people from all over are taking more control of their finances, let's say, than ever before, which is creating a lot of stress and headache. Investment opportunities are abound. So I think you and I talked about this in the past before, but we just take something that creates a lot of stress, like I'll name it now, but cryptocurrency, for example. It's a 24-hour trading platform. It's something that I'm seeing a lot of people that I work with who are taking up, who are interested in taking, people who don't have financial backgrounds. And crypto it's a new and evolving field. It's exciting. The door never closes on it. But what happens is that's creating a lot of stress, headaches, fear of the unknown, fear of volatility. And this, I think, in part has exploded, in part because we all have more time to think about this now. We have more time to do it, even though, like that, as an example, crypto is a 24-hour trading cycle. If you were working and we were not living in a pandemic world, and you were not working from home and going to the office, you'd be tired. You wouldn't have time to do the research. You wouldn't have time to do the trading, maybe during your lunch break or something. But now that we have a lot more time, it's something people have taken on, and not just crypto, but trading their own in stock portfolios. Of course, what's trending right now is the economy is on a real downturn. And a lot of people are suffering because of this. And it's making people question, where am I going with my career? It's making some people thankful that they have a steady job at this point in time. So there are a lot of emotions, I think, that are coming from taking control of your own finances and having a lot more time for yourself, and not necessarily sticking to a routine. Because I'll tell you what, if in these last couple of years, if I've seen anything, it's people creating their own routine, which may sound like an attractive concept, but at the same time, the lack of routine has created all sorts of new mental health and coaching related issues that I don't think our world has faced before.
And the lack of routine, you basically talk about a common pre-pandemic workplace, as in going to an office, coming together with your team members, maybe every day, going for coffee, going for common lunch, and so forth. This is basically the lack of such common routines that now each and everybody built their own routines, getting up half an hour later, taking no tube, but staying at home at their desk, and so forth. And that has also triggered some, not so beneficial consequences, I hear from you.
Right. It can and it can't. There was a lot of excitement. And I think in the beginning, when a lot of consultants that I work with were told, a lot of them were on the road anyway, but when you couldn't go to the office anymore, when bankers had to work from home, a lot of it's computerized now, but still there was maybe some initial excitement of, oh, this is great. I can sleep a little bit later in the morning, and I can spend more time with my family. And that's actually a really good benefit. If you're listening out there, anyone in the audience, and if you have young children, how did you feel at the beginning of this pandemic now, when your routine stopped and you were just working from home? Did you feel that, oh yes, I get to spend more time with my kids in the morning? That's a great thing. But how do you feel now? I mean, your kids are growing up. We may feel grateful to have spent more time with them, but how many of us are missing that contact, with people? Not just, we do meet with them on Zoom or video conferencing tech, which I love, but do we, the idea of the Monday afternoon meeting that was often dreaded, it's just after lunch, and what are we doing sitting in this big boardroom, and we're just having meetings. Now there's something valuable about actually meeting in person again and laughing. And here's another theme that's really popped up lately. There's a lot of people that are starting to go back to work now in offices that realize, I've missed the cooler chat. I've missed the coffee talk. I've missed just the small talk in between our work days. Because what's happened the last couple of years, when you and I are done, for example, after this, we click a button and we end our conversation. We've all done that over the last couple of years. So something that has come up that I've actually encouraged, whether it is psychotherapy or coaching, actually is breaks. But the idea of not just going out for a run or going to the gym, but I'm talking like a talking break. So meeting that colleague for a joke in the coffee room, or making sure you take your full allotted lunch hour or half hour, whatever you're allowed to take. So we're missing those moments. So, and because we haven't had it, at home, working a lot remotely, maybe you're working remotely in a beautiful country, and that doesn't really matter. So that could be, but for many people that I work with that are working from home, there's that contact with other coworkers that is deeply, deeply missed.
And I want to use that as a segue because you talked a lot about contact with other team members, and we've also talked earlier a little bit about job satisfaction. And I'm wondering if there is one or maybe three, the number you may choose yourself, but key components to job satisfaction, and if it's in fact the one that we've been talking about for the past few minutes, or if you have some thoughts on that.
Yes. Well, two key components. One, it usually starts with the people. If you've been on any kind of management training or the like, what do we always hear? People often leave jobs because of the people, or go to jobs because of the people that you trust, people that maybe irked you the wrong way a little bit. That could be why we leave. Stresses that are built up because we have an overbearing boss, an over demanding boss. So that's the number one component as to job satisfaction, as to why people leave. Often it is because of the people they don't want to leave or people they do want to leave. It's not just the amount of work, but it's definitely the people involved. So there is that. The other key component, perhaps it's not too surprising, but it is confidence in the work you do. How often do we as consultants go into a role and feel like I don't know as much as I think I should, or I don't know as much about a topic that they're asking me to know? Sometimes we can feel less confident, going into that meeting or going into to meet those people. So a lot of it comes down to how confident am I in the field that I'm in the work that I'm doing. So without sounding way too obvious here, if you don't like the people you're working with, and you don't feel confident in the work that you're doing, maybe it's because you're being asked to do something outside your comfort zone. Maybe it's because you don't feel like you don't know enough about a subject. Maybe it's because you're just there for the money. And that's actually okay. I mean, I'm not going to sit up here and say working for a good salary is not a great thing, because of course it is. But sometimes when we do that, we lose sight of why are we at work in the first place? What really do we wake up in the morning thinking, I'm actually excited to do one thing at work today? Not, am I excited for my life in 5 years? I'm not one of those types of psychologists and coaches. I want to ask you, what's one thing when you wake up in the morning that you're excited to do at work? If we can't think of anything on one day, that's okay. But if we're getting into a pattern where we can't think of one thing we're excited for every day for a week, then something else is going on here. So confidence, the type of people we work with, excitement, it all links together as to how satisfied we're going to be at a job.
No, absolutely. Confidence, excitement, and the people you work with. And I wonder if also over the past few years, but the meaning of one's work is becoming more and more important. I think there's also different interpretations of what a meaning of work is, but is that something that you also experience, that people more and more question their meaning of why am they doing what they are doing or not?
Yes, absolutely. No, it's a great question. Meaning is at the heart of everything, and very much so. And meaning does mean different things for different people. So it's important to think of meaning as like a spectrum. So what works for someone on one side of the spectrum might not work on the other side. So meaning for some clients I work with in fields that, we've talked about, whether you are a consultant listening, whether you're, a
A
banker, or whether
housewife.
you're a housewife or a doctor, or any of you that are listening right now, we may go to jobs, let's say, because I think that's kind of what we're talking about here, jobs and meaning. So if we're working in a field and our meaning, our purpose, let's not confuse both. Meaning and purpose often go together. So if our purpose or meaning is to provide for your family, that's okay. We can get through our jobs and certain parts that don't satisfy us. But in the last couple years, and this ties together with working from home and having more flexible working and time to ourselves, that meaning has changed. It's not just about what I've seen anyway with clients. It's not just about how sad am I providing, a means for my family? Am I providing, money for my family? It's about how am I making an impact now? When people are able to work from home, I've seen more people actually start businesses than ever before, from home, because they have more time to do so, or at least start a part-time business while you have another job. I've seen a rise in nonprofit working even. So people have derived meaning from, can I make a meaning in this world from creating a positive impact? So I've seen a lot of social enterprises pop up from the likes of bankers, consultants, whichever field you're in. I'm seeing it all over. So, but meaning can be very personal and very much, am I doing something for my family? And that's just as important as anyone saying, I want to change the world, sort of thing. Each issue we all go through is just as valid as anyone else's issue. So when it comes to meaning, when it comes to why do I need to improve my job satisfaction? When someone comes to me and they say, well, it's because my family, my wife and I are fighting and it's affecting my job. That to me is as valid of an issue to work as, I don't like my job because I'm not making an impact on the world and I want to do that. So different things for different people.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think you have to also appreciate the uniqueness of each and every individual and of the situations why they are struggling or wanting to strive and wanting to make an impact or wanting to just make sure that at home everything is fine and that they still make a lot of money or still make enough money to bring food on the table for a big family or whatsoever, right? How do you help people motivate themselves in such a situation? So if somebody says, I'm lacking impact or I'm lacking clarity as in where to move, what is usually a process that you go through with individuals to make them understand, that there is a good motivation to change something?
So one of the schools of psychology that I subscribe to is a school of psychology called positive psychology. It was in part started by a psychologist named Martin Seligman, who himself got his start in other types of therapies. But the reason I mention this to you is because it ties into motivation. What I help clients do is, and I understand your question there of when sometimes we can work with people who say, I'm not motivated. I don't have any of the resources or things around me to feel motivated. That's not necessarily true. I don't have the magic remote button to help to press to get anyone. If I could do that, I would. Trust me, I would, because I want to help each and every person that walks into my door. But the truth is that we all have the resources. We just often forget about them or don't want to approach them for many reasons. So, for example, I may see someone who has been working towards, let's say, working in a bank for most of their life. It's been their education, it's been who they've associated with, it's been their professional identity. But they might come to me and say, I'm just not motivated to work here anymore. What do I do, Joshua? Well, I mean, what do I do, like Dr. Josh here, when, most people call me Dr. Josh. Joshua sounds too formal, but but what do I do? And one thing I try to tell them is, well, first of all, we're questioning why we want to work at a bank, first of all. And what jazzes us, what really gets us excited. And I'm not kidding when I say this. I've heard people range from different answers, from I really actually enjoy working in space, believe it or not, down to actually wanting to become a coach themselves. And that's kind of where they get a lot of interest. So positive psychology helps us find our motivations by actually spinning this around and saying, no, it's not that you don't have the right level of thinking or the ideas to motivate yourself to either do something better at work or to do a different type of job entirely. It's just we're often afraid to make the next step. It might be, I'm not motivated to work with my boss. How do I get myself more motivated to work with him? So we might run through a series of questions of what makes us afraid of working with our boss? What makes us afraid of having a conversation with our boss? What is it about our work in the morning, where we can't get up in the morning and say, I really enjoy this job? People often have the answers themselves locked up, but what we're often stuck by is saying, I often don't want to have that difficult conversation with my family or my boss. I often don't want to make that difficult decision to move jobs or move careers. There's something stopping me. Maybe it's I'm afraid I won't be seen as valuable. I'm afraid I'll be let go very quickly. I'm afraid that a difficult conversation with my boss will backfire and then I'll be asked to do less and I'll eventually be pushed out the door. A lot of times, those types of things will stop us from feeling the motivation to succeed and do better at work. This could be at home, it could be at school. I sometimes work with students too. So a lot of those types of kind of mental roadblocks.
So you run through the different scenarios with your clients and clarify what is holding them back, what is motivating them on the other hand, and help them individually. That sounds very interesting. Another thought that came to mind when you were talking is this fear or the anxiety of change, if you want to say. So people may have a sunk cost bias because they've invested 10 years or 15 years or whatsoever years into a particular career, into a particular position and so forth. But what I hear, and you may clarify or not, is that also the perspective on change and career changes is being altered in a way that it's more accepted for oneself, but also in a community, in a society, to change careers. Is that something that you could elaborate on a little bit?
Yes. Well, let's think about this. Change is something we often fear. As human beings, we're afraid of the emotions also that come with change, whether we want to change our jobs, whether we want to change our address, whether we want to change our family, grow our family even. Sometimes that comes up of people that are happy with their family life, but when another child comes along, we're often afraid sometimes of that change, or we can embrace it. Think of what's happened in the last couple years. Were we afraid of making the change of working from home? We weren't. It was a bit more of a comfortable lifestyle. For some people that are out there listening, maybe it wasn't the lifestyle we wanted. Maybe we wanted to stay in the office. But it was a change that we had to embrace. That kind of, and you're right, there's a lot of anxiety and stress and fear that comes with change. But we've all now been through a series of changes, not just in our work style. We've already gone through changes. You or I, Ismail, we may know someone, well, we certainly may know someone that's had COVID. We may know someone whose life has been affected dramatically by it, who's lost a loved one from COVID. We've had changes thrust upon us without asking. So when it comes to the anxiety of change, particularly in our world, or even look at the external events around us, the war that's ongoing, the very difficult economic times, I mentioned cryptocurrency there because I work a lot with the digital markets and the like, and there might be a change coming to the way we do finances and the way we exchange money. I mean, that's kind of what crypto is, and the projects associated with it are aiming to be. There are changes that we are embracing, whether we like it or not. So whenever anyone comes to me and says, I'm feeling really anxious about changes, just like in our question earlier, think of what we've done. We often have this roadblock of thinking, I'm feeling anxious about change, without realizing you've already gotten through, for better or for worse, changes anyway. We've gotten through very difficult changes. I'm part of I forget what generation it's called now. The generation that was born in the 80s. So, this generation has gone through quite a bit of change ourselves when it comes to, dealing with wars, economic collapses. A lot of people are moving now to new cities and new countries. I work a lot with expats. I am an expat myself, moving from the United States to the United Kingdom, and love my life here in the UK. But still, there's a lot of change that we go through there. So when it comes to the anxiety of change, we want to admit it, that we feel anxious about it. But we also, as painful as it might sound, want to relive all the changes that we've gone through already, because we often forget that we can get through it.
And I would even say or go as far that change is rather a constant process than multiple changes one after another, right? Especially in the times that you and I live, and most of our audience is born in, we have such a constant demand for change, and that might be jobs, that might be locations, that might be mindsets, that might be assumptions. So I think it's also interesting to understand how do people cope with change, and I guess that also age plays a role here, but I think there is many different components that play a role here. I don't know if you have some thoughts on that, like what are the components that make us think about change?
Yes, well, it's actually, and this is part of what therapy and to some extent coaching is about, which is documenting change. If we're anxious about change, what I often do in therapy with my clients is, without going into too much detail, there's a record that we write on, which allows us to see all the different moments that we feel anxiety, let's say around change. So it may be this job that we moved around to, or it may be this different task that we were, a lot of people are coming and going now between jobs. We may work on teams that look completely different now than what they were 2 years ago. And we may be having to do different people's work that we didn't expect. So there are levels of change that we've already had to deal with. So documenting all these different types, listing all these different types of changes we've gone through is vital. It's key, but it's written in the stars. I mean, I'm a space fan myself. And, when it comes to change that we deal with, it's literally the planet we live on is full of change. It's why, if you look at the moon, for example, the astronauts' footprints, they'll be there for millions of years in theory because there's no wind. We live on a planet where the wind blows the dust, and there's change just in our natural environment. So it's only natural that when it comes to jobs, our lives, the way we look, and that is quite a popular therapeutic topic. I hate to say it, but it's, as we get older, our looks change and the way we look at ourselves change. And that itself can be a very nerve-wracking experience. So, but it's part of embracing it and seeing how you've managed that change before and how you can manage it again. That's actually a very positive psychology way of looking at the change. But you're absolutely right. It's part of our fabric and something we absolutely want to embrace.
Mm-hmm. So then has the sheer number of changes made the society more resilient, you would say, or more anxious about changes?
Both, both, both. It's absolutely both, and it has to be. Because wouldn't it be easier? Let's say you or I, where if we worked at the same company, anyone out there listening now, wouldn't it be easier if you worked at the same company, earned a paycheck, dependable, no matter what you were doing? Just let's just say you were going to earn a paycheck for the rest of your days. That would be easy, but that's not necessarily a reality all the time. It may be for some, but for a lot of us, we're going to be moving jobs to something better, actually. And we, as human beings, we always strive to be better. That's part of who we are. It's part of the human experience. When things are getting worse, that's not a fun place to be. So we try to correct things. That's where psychologists and coaches, come in, in part to help us. But no, it's made society anxious because we don't like change, but at the same time, it's absolutely necessary. If we want to learn, it's what have our early teachers always told us? Why do we study history? Because we always try to learn from it. History has taught us that change happens and has happened. And the best we could do is try to learn from it somehow to make ourselves better for it. I understand some history textbooks can be biased and all that, but the point is change. That's a constant, as you said. It's throughout human history. Whether you read the Bible, whether you read a history textbook, it is something that has been a part of our experience. Whether it's just a job you're trying to look to, a salary, a job where you want to be paid more. Change is always there, and it's always going to be there, because if we stayed the same, I don't know if you've ever seen the show like Star Trek or anything like that, but there's, for any Star Trek listeners out there, there's this character on Star Trek: The Next Generation. You may have heard of him. It's called Q. He's an omnipotent godlike creature who's at the top of the evolutionary chain, where Q's life is the same. He could do anything he wants. He can be anything he wants. He can go anywhere, but he gets bored. He gets bored. That's why he bothers the Star Trek crew, because their life is full of drama. It's full of change. They're learning about the universe, and that fascinates him. That's a really interesting character study. But his Q's life is always the same. He's accomplished everything he's wanted to. If you or I and anyone out there listening, we might say, I want to take the easy road. I want that job to be the same. I want that paycheck to be the same. But we will become bored no matter what stage of evolution we go to. It's just hardwired into us. So absolutely, change is part of us.
And that's something you bring up there that I find tremendously interesting, that you say people will definitely get bored and people always will want to be better. Is that something that you can elaborate on? Why is that so? And is that evolution or, yeah?
Well, it's, especially these days, let's just take a grounded example. It's not just a part of like evolution, you could say, in the human experience. It's just part of the society we live in. Every time we log into YouTube, for example, or whenever we're watching, there's a huge football match this weekend, the Champions League final. Whenever there's a commercial, an advertisement, an interruption, it's kind of annoying. We are full of instant gratification. We want things our way. We don't want to be distracted by other things. But why is that? It's just because it's part of who we are. We want to know where we're going. And when we get interrupted in life, that's what change is about. It's a very uncomfortable place to be, but it's absolutely necessary. Things have to change. It's part of the human experience, but it's also, a part of growing and learning. When we get, I'll use YouTube as an example. When you get interrupted, when you listen to that music video or you're seeing that video you like, and that annoying advert pops up mid-syllable of a sentence that someone is saying on a video, what do we say to ourselves? Well, I don't want to deal with this advert anymore. I will give in and I'll pay for YouTube Premium. That's, to get rid of those. So very real down-earth example there, but that's us changing. That's not saying I'm just going to accept the status quo. I'm going to change my situation. I'm going to make sure I don't see these adverts anymore. But the reason I bring up that example is because it's uncomfortable to change. It may be uncomfortable for our wallets in that example with the YouTube Premium, but it is born out of necessity. It's born out of a need, something that we want to get rid of. And that's, being distracted by adverts in this one example.
So I hear that certain tendencies require us to change. And then I want to loop back to another example that you brought up earlier, and that's cryptocurrency. And I have the feeling, but I would like to ask you about it. Is that also that people want to be part of a certain change and do not want to miss out and therefore jump onto such a topic? I don't know if you have a few thoughts on that.
Not just with crypto, but with traders that I work with. There's a lot of buzzwords. You've probably heard it in the audience before. If you know someone who trades or trades yourself, there's FOMO, fear of missing out. There's FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. There's a lot of this that goes around, especially in that crypto market that's 24 hours, where there are a lot of people who made a lot of money in the last couple of years. Even before that, there have been downturns in the crypto market, for example. But here's an example. It's good that we're bringing this up, because here's an example where volatility and change are not a great thing to sit through, because whenever there's changes and people trade and people sell, we panic and we think to ourselves, wait a minute, did I make the wrong investment? Do I sell now? Do I save what I have? That's where a lot of the fear and the uncertainty comes. Of course, if you might be Warren Buffett, and you probably heard him say, the longer you're in a stock, let's say, the less risky it gets. I'm paraphrasing him. Don't sue me, Warren Buffett, but I did hear you say that somewhere. But there is some truth to that. And that's actually one way to kind of counter the difficult anxiety of change. And that's to be in something longer. And that's just not whether we're trading crypto or stocks. That's a job we're uncomfortable with. Sometimes it is easier to cut our losses and say, I'm out of this coin in crypto, or I'm out of this stock when trading, or out of this job in something we don't like. But what happens typically with the market, at least historically, the market rebounds. It goes up when you stay in something. That's why a lot of people, you hear a lot of advice to hold, especially if you're down on something. If you're down on stocks, or you tend to want to hold unless you absolutely need that money. But the same can be applied to jobs we don't like. Is the best thing to leave? Maybe sometimes it is. But what happens if we hold? When we hold, we adopt a different strategy. We might speak to our boss that's making us uncomfortable. We might talk to other coworkers. We might take up other tasks within that job and realize, it's not as bad to hold. I do see a future here, with the job. Maybe the same thing. I'm switching back now to the trading aspect of crypto or stocks. I am not a financial guru at all. I'm not trying to pretend I am, but if you look at history, what happens is, if the market rises, if you can hold, you might say to yourself, I really believe in this project long term. Let me hold, and I'll see some value. And the same thing can be said in our personal lives in that way, with jobs or family, even, especially when we're dealing with familial conflicts. This happens a lot, family conflicts. And what do I do? Can I stay in my marriage? How does this work? Oftentimes we want to make a quick decision, but what happens if we just hold? That's sometimes therapy, especially, is about asking the right questions, or it's about asking the difficult questions, not just coming up with the perfect answers.
No, absolutely. And that brings up a thought in myself when you said, okay, sometimes it might as well be much more wise to hold. And that probably is true for most of the stock decisions. I don't know if it's true for most of the cryptocurrency decisions, but and I don't know if there is sufficient data to make assumptions about that. But let's say you've traded a lot of cryptocurrency over the past, let's just say 5 years. So you've entered fairly early, and you are very used to let go and not hold on to anything anymore. So you let go a lot of the times, and within no time, because as you said, it's a market that is open 24/7. It's a very fast paced market. What does that, or is there also an ability that it also changes the personality of that person due to this high pace letting go in other aspects of life, family, friends, and so forth?
Absolutely. Because oftentimes, characteristics of, let's say, trading or dealing with conflicts in general anyway, is the same can be said for both, where we often feel like we act on impulse. We act because of influences. We act on our emotions. We may act out of fear. And realizing that, acknowledging that, whether you still choose to make the decision, it's up to you. But when we acknowledge what's making us make a decision, to abandon a coin, for example, I hate to use that word abandon, but abandon a coin, or abandon a company, or to leave our family, or whoever it might be, or marriage, or our job. If we're acting on that because of emotion, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But we want to ask ourselves, is that emotion the emotion we don't want, whether it's fear or anxiety? Is that consuming us? Is that, the reason why we're making a decision? Or is there something more? A lot of times our anxiety, when we choose to leave a job, for example, that comes out, we are acting on our emotion. But that, as I said earlier, there's a lot about confidence there. Do we feel like this job just isn't me anymore? Maybe some people actually might say I'm too good for this job. And that's okay. I want more of a challenge. I hear that a lot. I want to move jobs because I want a challenge. But sometimes we leave it because it's just not the right fit. But it doesn't mean we couldn't make it fit. Sometimes it's because we don't have as much confidence as we'd like. Same thing with trading, for example. Not financial advice at all here, so full disclaimer, but why might we want to leave stop investing in a company or a project? It's because we don't have the confidence that it's going to go up. But how do we know? How do we know it won't go up? Is that after doing all our due diligence? Is that after sitting in on certain like earnings calls? Well, how about with our job? People I work with sometimes have difficulty in their marriages. And when people say we're making a decision to leave, is that because we're acting out of emotion? Is that because we just don't have confidence that we can make this work? Is that because we don't love the other person anymore? It's not that any of those reasons are invalid. It's just awareness is everything. And to kind of, this is a roundabout way of answering the question here, but if we can start to gain awareness of why we're making decisions, just that clarity alone will inform you for life. It will inform you if you can be aware of why you make decisions. We may think about this in passing, but some of our thoughts come and go, Ismail. They come and go, and we may have that light bulb moment, but then forget it. So, well, that's why psychologists and coaches come in part, because we want to help you capture that moment and help you learn from these moments. We can't make decisions for you, but we can help analyze what is making us make decisions to leave the job. If we can't make financial decisions for you, so whether you choose to leave a coin or a company, that's on your own. But to really talk about the emotion behind it, so that's really, really important.
No, absolutely. And the question that arises from that for me is, how do you take more aware decisions? I suppose there is no textbook answer, but what is something that you could share with the audience in regard to that?
About what was
Taking
about,
a more aware decision.
Yeah, absolutely. So I won't go into all the tools that I use here, but I mentioned there's a type of record, for example. So if let's say any of you listening out there, you're having second guesses on the drive to work right now, on the train to work, or you're listening to this before you go to sleep maybe, and you're thinking, do I really want to go where I'm going tomorrow? The awareness is vital, because what we would want to do in these moments, as we're second guessing ourselves and our career decisions or our trading decisions, or whatever we're feeling nervous about, we want to record where we are, when we are, exactly what our thoughts are, what emotions go with those thoughts. Is there another way to think about those thoughts? Something it's often said to us in life, but we forget to do this. If someone else came to you with the same reservations, what would you say to that other person to help them calm down? Because this is something we try to find out ourselves. There's many other tools that I use that I love to work with people on, that really help build our awareness. But start with some of those points, because they really kind of help guide us to that place of understanding. And it's not just awareness, but it's understanding, and it's acknowledgement of what we're going through. Yeah.
So I hear a lot of data collection and recording, and then acknowledgement of such. What role does intuition play in your life personally, if you want to comment on that?
Intuition? Yeah. Oh, tons of it. And I could talk about this for hours, even though I only have about 10 minutes left myself. But but intuition is everything for me. I think, I mentioned I'm someone, and this is why I love to work with expats too, someone who's moved to another country, from the US. I've met people from all different walks of life. I work with all people from all different walks of life, different languages. I wish I spoke even more languages than just English, and I speak Spanish, but I'm learning I've learned Polish actually in my time. And in Europe, because of family history, in Europe, you learn to speak a lot of languages. And so intuition for me is built off of all these different experiences that I have. It's built off of, knowing I can live in another place, getting to meet people from different cultures, getting to meet people from different societies. You really do enrich yourself when you expand and grow and try a new skill and meet someone who doesn't think like you, and you meet someone who doesn't act like you. when you say to yourself, I'm not afraid to meet someone who's different than me, you really build your intuition. And so I've always tried to live by that standard. And I see a lot of people grow when they try to adopt that. That's not the way to always live life, and not the be all end all. And I work with people and have met people who enjoy living in the same place. And if that floats your boat, I think that's great. We can work towards how happy we are and what makes us happy with that. But for me personally, no, that's how I've built. I think that's where intuition has really come from for me.
What a wonderful perspective on intuition, Joshua. Thank you very much for sharing that one. And I do, in fact, have 3 questions that I ask each and every of my guests. But before we go there, I would like to hear from you, because I'm more than sure that our audience would like to get to know more about yourself. Where can people reach out? You've mentioned your website already. You mentioned a few things, but if you have something to share, then please do.
Yeah, please. You can always contact me through my website. So it's bournepath.com. My surname is Bourne, like the Bourne movie. So it's Bourne and then PATH.com. So I get a lot of people that contact me through the website. So there's a contact me form, and my email and office number is on there. So you can certainly contact me that way. I also have a social media presence on Instagram and Facebook in particular. I'm not great at Twitter, otherwise I would, but you can find me at instagram.com/bournepath, and facebook.com/bournepath. So please contact me through my website at bournepath.com, or through Instagram or Facebook. I'm very happy to chat with all of you there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I will, of course, make sure to link each and every of those platforms. And also, again, want to take the time to acknowledge you, Joshua, for the great work that you're doing and for helping so many people from different facets of life and with different challenges or desires to strive in life. So thank you very much for your everyday work. And with that, I want to ask you 3 questions. The first one would be, what motivated you over the past week?
Motivated me over the past week? Well, it's kind of answering kind of your point that you just mentioned. In these difficult times, people come to me with all different kinds of issues, from wanting to change jobs, countries, you name it. So what has motivated me this past week, and actually made me feel quite great, is helping my clients, helping them and again, people from the UK and around the world, where I get requests from people from different parts of the world. So that motivates me. I get excited. I'm excited just to talk to you today, Ismail. So, but the work that I do and the clients that I have, that's what motivates me and keeps me going for sure.
Wonderful. And one can feel that it keeps you going. So keep on doing that. Thank you so much. The second question would be, Joshua, who are your mentors, or whom do you look up to?
Oh, sure. So I have to get personal with this. So it would be my father, my dad. I grew up playing sports, actually. My dad is a physician, and he lives in the US. I'm going to use one more kind of cultural reference here, and apologies to maybe the non-American audience that may be listening, but there was a show called Full House, and there was a comedian that just passed away, actually, Bob Saget, who played the father, Danny Tanner, on Full House. I always saw my dad as Danny Tanner, someone who is such a good person, who works hard, who always tries to do the right thing. He would, like Danny Tanner, at the end of each episode, he'd go to his children and say, what did we learn today? This is what life is about. It sounds corny, but my dad would always do that. And he's always there for me and never judges and never questions, encourages me to be my best. He was my basketball coach. I mentioned I played sport and I love basketball. So he was my basketball coach growing up. He was there for me every step in the way, a step of the way in my life. He is my mentor, and I feel like I can ask him about anything, whether it's job things or, in terms of, I want to do more research on something. What do you think? Or it may be a life related question. It's just, my dad never judges, and he is the best dad in the world. He is the mentor that I wish everyone could have. And I've been very lucky to have him. So that is my mentor. Yeah.
Wonderful. That sounds very great. So a big shout out to your dad and to all the other great dads and moms out there in the audience and in the world. Thank you so much for that wonderful answer. And my third question would be, I call it the 3 truths. And I would like you just stated that you like space. So let's imagine that you are traveling in space for quite some time, actually, all by yourself, for multiple months or even years. And after a long, long travel, you encounter a human-like species. And they can only process 3 facts or 3 truths about humanity before they decide whether or not they want to get to know us or you better. What is it that you share with them?
The 3 truths on humanity. Well, that's good. I'd be glad to speak for humanity. I mean, my interest in space goes back to, there was one point in time in my life when I first graduated college, actually, where I did some work for SETI as an administrator. I'll go into that another time, but it's a NASA offshoot. So this question fascinates me. Number 1 truth I'd say is mind our curiosity. We are a curious people, and our actions don't always dictate our beliefs all the time. It's partly because we're curious. So there's a lot of people out there where if we discovered other, even intelligent life, especially human life, we might be afraid. I say, let's be curious. So I'd want to tell them, whatever we do, we're going to be curious. The other thing I'd say, not to, because I'm a human being, I am Mr. Let's Go Humans. But the one thing I would say to other intelligent life that's out there, another truth, is please help us, when it comes to redeeming ourselves or forgive us for certain things, because we are human beings that act in certain ways sometimes. I won't go into too much because it's not about politics here, but there are injustices in the world. And if they were to get to know some of them and learn about our planet and our ways of life, they might see that, if they consider themselves a moral species anyway, they may see this as an indictment on humanity. But we have a lot of redeeming qualities about us. Just the people I mentioned earlier in this podcast episode about people that are starting nonprofits, for example, I'm seeing a lot of people really trying to change the world and make it a better place. So whether it's, donations, volunteering opportunities, there are a lot of redeeming qualities about us. So I would say, please look out for that as another truth about us, not just our injustices, but our redeeming aspects. And I'd say the other truth to look out for humans is our ability to grow. I think it talks about change. If I'm an intelligent species on another planet, I would actually, and if I were approached by another intelligent species, I would want to know, are they only a certain way, or can we grow into liking them? So that kind of ties into curiosity, know our curiosity a little bit, because that fuels our growth. But please know that we could change. Know that whatever impressions you gather of us human beings first, we can always change. And there's a reason why, for example, like prison centers, I don't work a lot with, this is forensic psychology now, so I don't work a lot with criminals, but there's a reason why we call them rehabilitation centers now rather than just prisons, because no matter what we've done, we're trying to change and we're trying to learn from our mistakes. And so that's another truth about human beings, that we are a species that likes to change and grow from that and learn from mistakes. So know that we can. It's the reason why we've developed the technologies that we have. It's the reason why, without getting into too much politics here, Ismail, it's why there's a lot of studies on climate change, for example. We're trying to understand why our world is changing, the role we have to play in it. and we're trying to change things ourselves. So that actually ties into our curiosity. It ties into our redeeming qualities and the change that we're trying to seek. So those would be the truths. Of course, I mean, I'm very interested in life on other planets, and hopefully one day in my lifetime getting to meet people from other worlds. And that's my hope, for me personally, that I, and that's what I'd want to communicate, especially to them.
Sounds like you're the personification of this curiosity, and I really much appreciate those three truths. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I think, yes, you opened quite a few doors for us to come back for a session 2, 3, or 5, whatever we choose to. So with that, Joshua, thank you so much for, a very exciting conversation on change, on curiosity. And yeah, it was a pleasure to host you on the Just Another Mindset podcast.
Thank you very much. It was a great talk, and great to talk with you. And thanks everyone for giving it a listen.
If you enjoy this podcast and learn from it, please feel free to share this episode with a friend or two, and make sure to subscribe to the Just Another Mindset podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please use the next 10 seconds to give the Just Another Mindset podcast a rating, and know that you will help me to create more meaningful content like this, and also that it will help other people to find this content and get inspired as well. If there is any future topic or guest that you would like to hear more about on the Just Another Mindset podcast, please let me know by leaving a comment on YouTube or sending a mail directly to contact@ishmaelwondergarten.com. And if nobody told you lately, be reminded that you are worthy, you matter, and you can achieve anything.
Do more of what makes you happy.
Be yourself, be positive.
Change.
Just another mindset.